There was a famous chef who was on vacation in Europe. This chess champion was an art enthusiast. And so while in Europe, he visited several art galleries and art museums. And on one visit, he came along a piece that really struck a chord with him, because depicted in the painting was a picture of a chessboard, and on one side of the chessboard was the devil, laughing hysterically. On the other side of the chessboard was a young man who was obviously distraught. Sweat pouring from his forehead, biting on his nails, tears in his eyes. There was no question as to what was being depicted here, especially when the chess champion saw the title of the painting. It was simply Checkmate. The devil and this young man were locked in a chess game for the young man's soul, and it appeared that the young man was about to lose. The chess champion studied that picture for several minutes. Then he asked the proprietor of the museum, he said, "Do you have a chessboard?" And the proprietor of the museum said, "Why, yes, I do." And so he brought it to the chess champion. He set it up right underneath the painting, and he arranged the pieces on the board exactly the way that they were arranged in the painting. And he studied the board, and he looked at the picture. He studied the board, he looked at the picture, and he did this for several minutes. And then he started laughing. And he began carrying on a conversation with the young man in the picture. He said, "Mister, I sure wish you could hear me right now, because there's one more move left on the board, and you get to make it." My friends, I don't know where you're at tonight. I know you're here, but I don't know where you're at spiritually. But I think there are a lot of people, a lot of Christians, in fact, who have been duped into believing that the devil is in control. They've been duped into thinking that they are merely puppets for the devil. They've been duped into thinking that they have no other option but just hunker down and hope that they make it. Well, I got some good news for you tonight. You can take your fingers out of your mouth, you can wipe the sweat from your forehead, and you can dry those eyes, because there's one more move left on the board, and you get to make it. I was reading an article the other day. It was actually published in 2018. And the article struck me because the headline read, "The U.S. military is now recruiting soldiers to fight in a war that started before they were born." The article stated, as the war in Afghanistan enters its 18th year and the U.S. Army falls thousands short of its recruiting goals, the Pentagon is recognizing it has to do something different to recruit an age group that does not remember 9/11 and for whom the war on terror has been background noise their entire lives. The article goes on to state, most Americans are only vaguely aware that we're still fighting overseas, and the reason for that is that they don't have any skin in the game. It's extremely difficult to rally up enough troops to fight in a war that they know nothing or care nothing about. You've got to be invested in some way, right? It's got to hit close to home in some respects. And I don't know if you realize this or not, but you are locked in a war. This is the fight of your lives. And the sooner you recognize that, the better off you're going to be. We don't always take the enemy seriously, though. That's the problem. The devil has become a cute little caricature. A little guy dressed in a red suit with horns and a long tail holding a pitchfork. You know, we even print his likeness on sweatshirts. You know, we even garner this mindset that it's somewhat adorable to be naughty. And then you have our sports teams, the Sun Devils, the Blue Devils, the Red Devils, that only reinforce the idea that the devil is not the enemy, but just rather a team to be cheered for or against. One of the oldest books in the world on military strategy is The Art of War, written by Sun Tzu in the 6th century BC. This Chinese military treatise consists of 13 chapters, each dealing with a particular aspect of warfare. It has long been praised as the definitive work on military strategy. It's said to have influenced Napoleon. General Douglas MacArthur is said to have drawn inspiration from it. It's said to have even been used or consulted during Operation Desert Storm. But of the many key insights found in the book, one is this. So it is said that if you know your enemies and know yourself, you will fight without danger in battles. If you only know yourself but not your opponent, you may win or may lose. If you know neither yourself nor your enemy, you will always endanger yourself. We have to know our enemy, his schemes, his objectives, his strategies, so that's where I want to spend our time this evening. Let's start in Revelation chapter 12. And in Revelation chapter 12, beginning in verse 7, here's what we read. And there was war in heaven. Michael and his angels waging war with the dragon. The dragon and his angels waged war, and they did not prevail. And there was no longer a place found for them in heaven. And the great dragon was thrown down, the serpent of old, who is called the devil and Satan, who deceives the whole world. He was thrown down to the earth, and his angels were thrown down with him. At some point, there was a rebellion in heaven, and the devil lost. He was cast out of heaven and down to earth, which brings up a question. I don't want to get too far into the weeds tonight, but it brings up a question. If Satan is an evil angel who was once in heaven, does that mean that at some point he was good? If not, did God create evil? Well, I think it must be noted that Satan is not deity, because deity cannot be restrained, and deity is all-powerful. That doesn't describe Satan. Satan was created. The question becomes, was he created evil? You know, God made all things out of the goodness of his being. Upon creation of every living creature, he declared, "It is good." To create evil would mean that there is a certain amount of darkness in God, which means that he would not be perfect or completely holy, and thus not worthy of our worship. I believe that God cannot be held responsible for creating evil, because out of the essentialness of his being, he only creates good. But you see, God has granted us with a beautiful and wonderful gift, the gift of personal choice, or free will. When one chooses not to follow and thus chooses to disobey or go against the Creator is to blame. God is not morally culpable if the gift of choice is abused, and evil is most certainly a choice. Evil exists because of the abuse of free will. So Satan corrupted himself. Listen to what Paul writes in 1 Timothy chapter 3, verses 6 and following, concerning the qualifications of elders. And not a new convert, so that he will not become conceited and fall into condemnation incurred by the devil. And he must have a good reputation with those outside the church, so that he will not fall into disgrace and the snare of the devil. Paul indicates that Satan was responsible for his own downfall, and his demise seems to be related to his pride. So what about this revolt in heaven? What took place? Well, we don't have a single detailed account, but I do think that we can piece some scriptures together and see maybe a little better what went on. If you look at 2 Peter chapter 2 and verse 4, it reads, "For if God did not spare angels when they sinned, but cast them into hell and committed them to pits of darkness, held for judgment." You stop right there, you get a pretty good indication of what happened. You look at Jude verse 6. "And angels who did not keep their own domain, but abandoned their proper dwelling place, these he has kept in eternal restraints under darkness for the judgment of the great day." Some versions use principality instead of domain. All that means is it's the Greek word arche, and in this case, it points to an official sphere of activity. It's an office or place of rule. Apparently, there were levels of authority among the angels. For example, you have the archangels, you have the cherubim, the seraphim, right? It appears that some of the angels were offended and disliked their given position, their status, and they wanted a higher one. Hence, they revolted against their divine appointment. As a result, they were cast down, as Peter indicates, and have been restrained in a state of punishment until the great day of judgment. Again, not a detailed account, but I think that we can get some insight by looking at these different passages as to what went on. It appears that Satan was a good angel at some point who, out of pride and selfish ambition, chose to rebel against God. Here's the deal. God made the first move when he created the angels. There was a rebellion in heaven led by Satan, leading to his removal from God's presence. God countered that move by creating Adam and Eve and placing them in the garden. Satan stepped in once again, and he convinced Adam and Eve to eat from the wrong menu, and paradise was lost. God countered that move by allowing Adam and Eve to live, albeit outside of the garden, but he kick-started his plan of redemption. Of course, Satan countered that move by infiltrating the heart of Cain, which led to the first murder in history. But then God countered that move through the birth of Seth, which led to people calling on the name of the Lord again. Then Satan countered that move through the birth of Nimrod, who built the nations of Babylon and Assyria, who rebelled against God. Of course, God countered that move by calling a man by the name of Abraham, who was the father of the nations. Satan countered that move with Egyptian slavery, and God countered that move by raising up Moses to lead his people to a land flowing with milk and honey. Do you get this idea? Have you ever noticed that the Old Testament seems to be move, counter, move, counter, move, over and over again? And sometimes it's a little hard to tell who's winning. And then you have this period of several hundred years where nothing seems to happen. It's like the two of them are just staring at the board. And then God finally says, you know what, I'm just going to go down there and fix that mess myself. Of course, we know that Jesus was part of the plan from the very beginning. Satan countered that move by tempting him in the wilderness. And Jesus overcame that with the Word of God. Eventually, Satan makes his final move. You know what it is? Satan's final move was to infiltrate the hearts of the religious leaders, filling them with bitterness and malice, blinding them to the reality of the Messiah. And Jesus is hung on a cross, and God countered that move with an empty tomb, with the resurrection. And listen to me, folks, if you hear nothing else I say tonight, that move is your move. And don't you ever forget it. Life is a test, isn't it? I mean, it really is. Life is a test. And unfortunately, many people are failing. I don't want to be all doom and gloom, but you know that's true. Life is a test, and many people, many of our Christian friends even, are failing. It's the toughest thing I do as a minister. To sit down with people and try to convince them that they are losing at life. That you're not passing the test, and if you keep going down this path, it's not going to end well. So when I counsel with a husband who has 3 kids at home, but has decided that he'd rather run off with his secretary and begin a new life, I try to tell him that's a loser's mentality. When I talk to a Christian who's walked away from the church and walked away from God because they prefer the shimmer and shine of the world, I tell them, that's not how a winner thinks. When I counsel with folks that just don't seem to have the courage to fight anymore, they're just tired of running the Christian race and they feel like that it would be easier if they just quit, I try to tell them, quitters never win. Life is a test. And unfortunately, many people are failing the test. And do you know how this whole thing turns out? Ask Judas. Ask Ananias and Sapphira. Better yet, ask Satan. When the 1,000 years are over, Satan will be released from his prison and will go out to deceive the nations in the 4 corners of the earth, Gog and Magog, and to gather them for battle. In number, they are like the sand on the seashore. They marched across the breadth of the earth and surrounded the camp of God's people, the city he loves. But fire came down from heaven and devoured them, and the devil who deceived them was thrown into the lake of burning sulfur, where the beast and the false prophet have been thrown. They will be tormented day and night forever and ever. Yeah, I think for the most part, our religious experience is pretty sanitized, right? Maybe not in Afghanistan right now, but in America, for the most part, our religious experience is pretty cauterized, it's pretty sanitized. We go to church, we live a moral life, we try to obey all traffic laws, we do our best to just be good little citizens, right? We come to church every time the doors are open. All things are good in our world. But we have to stop and consider that a battle is raging. You're smack dab in the middle of it. Doesn't matter if you want to recognize that. Doesn't really even matter if you want to fight. You're in the middle of it. You know, every morning a gazelle and a lion wake up to run, don't they? A gazelle wakes up and runs to keep from being the lion's lunch. And the lion wakes up to run in order to get the gazelle for his lunch. Their lives, by and large, are based on running. If the gazelle stops running, even for a moment, he risks being the lion's lunch. And if the lion stops running, he risks starvation. The devil hasn't stopped running, folks. He's running as hard now as he ever has been. So make sure that you are doing everything possible to keep from being his lunch. In the book of Numbers, chapter 32, we find the sons of Reuben and the sons of Gad requesting that Moses give them their inheritance east of the Jordan. The Reubenites and the Gadites were two tribes that had a large number of livestock. And they noticed that the lands of Jazer and Gilead would be a good place to settle, and so they asked that that land be given to them. But as a result, they would not be led over the Jordan River with the rest of Israel. Now, as you can imagine, this greatly displeased Moses. And notice his response in verse 6. Shall your brothers go to war while you yourselves sit here? Moses says, you're telling me that you're just going to plop down right here while the rest of your brothers go and fight? I mean, the only reason that land was available to them was because of those who had fought courageously and valiantly. Moses felt that by staying behind, they would discourage the others, kind of like the 10 spies did. And, that incurred God's wrath. And Moses felt that the same would happen in this instance. And notice what is written in verses 7 through 15. Now, why are you discouraging the sons of Israel from crossing over into the land which the Lord has given them? This is what your fathers did when I sent them from Kadesh Barnea to see the land. For when they went up to the valley of Eshcol and saw the land, they discouraged the sons of Israel so that they did not go into the land which the Lord had given them. So the Lord's anger burned in that day, and he swore, saying, none of the men who came up from Egypt, from 20 years old and upward, shall see the land which I swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. For they did not follow me fully, except Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, the Kenizzite, and Joshua, the son of Nun, for they have followed the Lord fully. So the Lord's anger burned against Israel, and he made them wander in the wilderness 40 years, until the entire congregation or generation of those who had done evil in the sight of the Lord was destroyed. Now behold, you have risen up in your father's place, a brood of sinful men, to add still more to the burning anger of the Lord against Israel. For if you turn away from following him, he will once more abandon them in the wilderness, and you will destroy all these people. We can have this cauterized, sanitized version of Christianity. We can live a pretty tame Christian existence, going about our daily business, singing our hymns, sending our kids to Bible class, looking both ways before we cross the street, do our daily Bible reading. But my friends, like Israel, we are at war. War against Satan and his forces of evil. And the Lord's army, the church, fights this battle. We don't fight it alone. In fact, we can't. There's no way you can win on your own. God never intended for us to practice Christianity on an island. There's no such thing as a Lone Ranger Christian. We're in this fight together. We need God. We need each other. Many soldiers of the past have fought valiantly to allow you to be here tonight and to keep fighting. And so, if we want to enjoy the blessings that God's family is afforded, we have to recognize that we're fighting for each other. We're in God's army, but we're fighting for each other, right? That war rages on. We must continue to fight this fight. We can't rest now. You know, when the Reubenites and the Gadites realized all that was at stake, when Moses actually opened their eyes to everything that they would be missing out on if they didn't go and fight, they changed their tune. Their heart changed to say, you know what? We've got to get in the game. Because sitters never win. You can be a sitter or you can be a fighter. You can be a participator or a spectator. It's up to you. But either way, the war's going to rage on. Have you ever seen the movie Cinderella Man? I guess it's a true story. Stars Russell Crowe. It's about this boxer who, during the Great Depression, he had walked away from boxing, and so he was no longer in his prime, but he decided to earn money for his family that he was going to get back into the ring. Well, he was advanced in years at this point, at least for a boxer. And he did pretty well. He was beating guys that were younger than him, and there was one scene in the movie where he's at a press conference, and the different sports reporters are asking him questions, and one of them asked him, "What are you fighting for?" And he says, "Milk. I'm fighting for milk." Milk for his family. He was fighting. He got back in the ring because he needed to earn a living for his family. He cared about his family. Do you know what you're fighting for? Do you have any idea what this is all about? Do you have any reason for being here tonight or for living a godly life outside of here? Of course you do, right? But understand, it's not just about a tame existence where, you live a good life that has some blessings in it, and you get to see everybody on Sunday, and you'll walk out of here and return to your normal life Monday through Saturday. No, it's bigger than that, right? A battle is raging. The devil is after you. Here's the deal, though. You can disagree with me on this. I don't mind. I don't believe the devil cares one bit about you. I don't think he does. The devil hates God. And because he hates God so much, he goes after the people God loves. I don't think he cares one iota about you. I think he just cares about hurting God. So he has his weapons of mass destruction pointed at you so he can get to God. But here's the deal. It doesn't end well for him. I've looked at the back of the Bible, and guess what? We win. Sometimes I will record the Cowboys game because the elders at Oldham Lane expect me to preach on Sunday night, and so I will record the Cowboys game to watch later, which means that I have to do this careful dance at church. You know what I'm talking about? I can't come in contact with anybody who has seen the game and will let the cat out of the bag. And the sports reporter who's on TV in Abilene, he goes to church with us, so I really have to avoid him. I usually just walk by and say, "Hey, David," just go on to my other stuff because I know he's let the cat out of the bag. So I record the game, and every now and then, doesn't happen often, but every now and then, somebody will let it slip. "Man, what about that game? You see how it ended?" And then they'll go on telling me about it. And I'm like, "I recorded it. I wanted to see it." I'll still go home and I'll still watch the game. But I don't watch it the same way, do I? I fast forward through certain parts of it because I know how it ends. I don't throw the remote at the TV when Dak throws an interception because I know we win. I don't punch the pillow when Zeke fumbles because I know how it ends. I know how this thing ends. We win. Better yet, God wins. And because we're on God's side, we win. But here's the deal. You got to keep fighting. Because the devil is continuing to fight. So we fight for ourselves, we fight for each other, and we fight for those in the world who don't know the things that make for peace, right? And this is so important because all too often we spend our time fighting the wrong enemy. Don't we? You do realize that the enemy is not people. I don't care what your political preference is. POTUS isn't the enemy. SCOTUS isn't the enemy. People are not the enemy. And the reason I know this is because Paul says, "Finally, be strong in the Lord and in the strength of his might. Put on the full armor of God so that you will be able to stand firm against the schemes of the devil. Listen, for our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the powers, against the world forces of this darkness, against the spiritual forces of wickedness in the heavenly places. People are not the enemy. People are the mission field. People are not the enemy. People are victims. Are there people who do wicked things? Absolutely. But this is not a flesh and blood battle. This is spiritual warfare. Which means that if you want to address the physical, you got to go to the spiritual, don't you? If this is spiritual warfare, how do you fix the physical? By going to the spiritual. Look up. Look to God. Be right with Him. Be right with other people. My son, he graduated in 2019. He's a student at Harding, but he played tennis and soccer in high school. And there were tennis matches, especially when he was in junior high. You didn't see this in high school much, but in junior high, I've watched him win a game in a match. I watched him win a game without ever swinging his racket. If you know anything about tennis, you know this can happen, right? So your opponent is serving, and you're standing there waiting, and he serves it in the net twice. Okay? Love 15. You move over to the other court. Serves it in the net twice. Love 30. You move back over here. Serves it in the net twice. Love 40. Move back over here. He serves it in the net twice. He double faulted all throughout the game. My son never had to swing his racket, never had to hit a ball, and he won the game. And I think that happens in the church. I think we're too busy beating ourselves, and the devil's just sitting back laughing. Just watch this. We can be the only organization that shoots its wounded. Do you realize that? How sad is that we can spend so much time bickering and fighting with each other, and the devil's just sitting back laughing? Because he didn't have to do anything. He won the game without ever having to lift a finger. Folks, we got to realize who the real enemy is. We got to quit punching each other. We got to quit hitting the ball into the net and realize that this is a spiritual battle. And we better get all on the same page, lest we lose, right? I love the way C.S. Lewis put it in the Screwtape Letters. There is no neutral ground in the universe. Every square inch and every split second are claimed by God and counterclaimed by Satan. The sooner we recognize that a battle is raging and that this is the fight of our lives, the better equipped that we will be to do something about it. And it all comes down to this. Here's the first thing that we need to understand when it comes to battling the devil. The devil operates by consent and cooperation. He needs a carrier. The devil has no authority. You realize that? He's not deity. He has no authority over you. The only authority he has over you is what you give him, so don't give him any. He has to operate by consent and cooperation. It's exactly what he did in the Garden of Eden, isn't it? He had no authority. He couldn't make Adam or Eve partake of that forbidden fruit, so he had to use deception. He had to lie. He was cunning. He was crafty. He had to get Eve to shift her authority to him. And it worked. In that moment, she allowed the voice of a snake to be the loudest in her life. And it cost her and her husband. Right? The devil works by consent and cooperation. He needs a vehicle. He needs a carrier. The other side of that coin is Jesus. After his baptism, he's led into the wilderness, right, for 40 days, where he is tempted by the devil. The devil couldn't make him turn those stones into bread. The devil couldn't make him jump from that highest pinnacle of the temple. The devil couldn't force him to bow down and worship him. You know why? Because he didn't have that authority. And Jesus defeated the devil by allowing the voice of God to be the loudest in his life. The devil needs a carrier. He needs a vehicle. So don't be one. Sounds so simple, doesn't it? A little bit harder to put into practice. But you have to understand that there is no authority. He can seem formidable. It's kind of like when you watch a football game. You have these big, strong, powerful guys out on the field, some of them weighing close to 400 pounds, right? And it's like a head-on collision every play. People are getting hurt. These guys are massive. They're humongous. They're beating the dog out of each other the whole game. But they don't have any authority. Who does? 7 little men, or even women now, dressed in funny shirts. When someone makes a mistake, when one of those big, massive guys does something that's illegal, they take out a yellow flag and they throw it out. Right? Stop it. You can't do that. They're the littlest people on the field. And yet, those big, bad football players have to listen to them, right? Because they can even throw them out of the game. They can throw the coach out of the game. They have all the authority. So it doesn't matter how big or massive or formidable the devil seems, he has no authority. Unless, of course, you give it to him. So don't give it to him. Just hours before the first airstrikes in Baghdad, President George W. Bush called all of his commanders together, and after hearing their briefings and their recommendations, he asked them one question. He looked them all in the eye and he asked, "Do you have everything you need to win?" And they all said, "Yes, Mr. President." My friends, the Bible is crystal clear that we have everything we need to win. It's your move. What are you going to do with it? How can we help you tonight? Like I said earlier, I don't know where you're at in your spiritual life, but I know this: every one of you are born with an expiration date, and you don't know when it's going to come due. You are locked in a battle for your soul, whether you want to recognize that or not, so you better start fighting. And if we can help you, if you're wounded, if you are ready to enlist, or maybe you're needing somebody to carry you for a little while, and maybe lift you up. That's what this family is for. We're going to be led in a song. If we can help you, why don't you come as we stand and as we sing.